Rebecca, thank you. You know, as I heard Rebecca speak, I kept thinking of how strange it is that any of us standing here today should have to share our stories, how we should have to somehow prove to the world that we have the same dignity and value as anyone else. I often ask people, how is it that you have a birthday when I have a day that I was accidentally born alive? What is the difference between you and me? It all comes down to that word choice, when we know that abortion is not a choice. And as Rebecca talked about, I am the founder and CEO of the Abortion Survivors Network, the only organization worldwide that serves babies who survive abortions just like me. They're moms who often parent their child after they survived their abortion and often carry that life and that story in secret. Like Rebecca, we have served hundreds of people. At this point, we have served over 700 abortion survivors who have survived every type of abortion procedure you can imagine. And just this week, I testified before the Senate and shared the story of a woman who experienced 2 medication abortions failing before she then traveled to New Mexico for a late-term abortion. Gratefully, she was found to be 32 weeks pregnant, and the abortionist there was only trained to complete abortions to 24 weeks. She ultimately made an adoption plan, and that little girl now gets to live her life, as does that mother, Evelyn. But that did not have to be their story. And that is the story that I live with every single day. Somehow I have to share with the world that I have as much dignity and value, even though I survived a failed saline infusion abortion. The Senate's response to me this week was, saline abortions aren't performed anymore. That is not the correct response. Abortion is abortion is abortion. In August of 1977, my birth mother, as a 19-year-old college student, actually had that saline infusion abortion forced upon her against her will. This is still the story of so many women still today. Behind the word choice, there is coercion, there is force, there is a lack of support and resources. In my birth mother's circumstances, my maternal grandmother, her mother, was responsible for forcing that abortion. She was a prominent nurse in their community in Iowa, and she was able to force that, bypassing hospital regulations and procedures with the help of her friend and colleague, the local abortionist. That type of procedure, if you're not aware of it, involved injecting a toxic salt solution into the amniotic fluid surrounding me in the womb. I literally soaked in that toxic salt solution for 5 days. That was longer than the standards of the procedure. I should have been poisoned and scalded to what should have been, by their standards, my death. But on the 5th day of the abortion procedure, her labor was induced and I was delivered alive. This is what the world calls an unsuccessful abortion, a living human being. And don't we need to face this as a society? Doesn't that tell us everything we need to know about abortion? Yes, I survived an abortion. Yes, I'm a CEO. Yes, I'm a social worker. Yes, I'm an advocate. I'm also a mother whose children never would have lived if that abortion would have successfully ended my life. I'm a friend. I'm a daughter. I had to have the same opportunity at life that each and every one of us should have been given. But maybe that's something you yourself take for granted. I am one of those survivors who is an adoptee. I didn't find out my story until I was 14 years old. And as you can imagine, those were some difficult truths to bear. Survivors find out their stories in all sorts of different ways and at all sorts of different times. Some find out young. We work with adoptive families and biological mothers to support them and prepare them for how to talk about these stories, because we don't have to be ashamed of it. We don't have to keep it a secret. We need to find healing, not just individually, but as families. Some survivors don't find out their stories until they're in their 60s and their 70s. And that person who attempted to abort them is passing away, and that's how they learn this great secret. But I can tell you, whenever you find out this information, it is devastating. not just because it speaks to us about our identity, but also the culture that we live in that is so supportive of abortion sends us messages implicitly and explicitly every single day that somehow there is something deeply wrong with us. When in fact, the problem is that abortion is what there is something deeply wrong about. I struggled with the reality of that abortion for a very long time in the culture that we live in that sends those messages. But I ultimately went searching for my biological parents, and I found them back in 2007. I also obtained my medical records. Abortion survivors are told time and time again that we must just be these figments made by the Republican machine to somehow restrict women's reproductive rights. I can tell you that no one wants to be in our shoes. I have never met anyone who wanted to be an abortion survivor. And most of us do not have medical records because this is a very inconvenient truth for a lot of people. But I am one of those survivors who has my medical records. I found them in 2007, and they do detail the abortion that I survived. Even after I found out through those medical records about the procedure and who my biological parents are, I didn't start communicating with my birth mother until 2013. That's how I learned that the abortion was forced upon her. That's how I learned that it was my grandmother involved in it. And that's how I learned the greatest secret that even my adoptive parents didn't know. And that is that my birth mother, Ruth, spent over 30 years of her life believing the abortion had been successful. Think about that for a minute. When the abortion was completed and she was under so much distress from that procedure, she was told that it had been successful. I ultimately was rushed to the NICU by a brave nurse who I am incredibly grateful for. But my birth mother didn't know if I had been a little boy or a little girl. She spent over 30 years with incredible regret. But she is one of the lucky ones to know that her child survived her abortion. Millions upon millions of women are not as fortunate as my birth mother. My birth mother, Ruth, is now a huge part of my life. I now know that I live in the very same area, Kansas City, Missouri, alongside my birth mother and one of my half-sisters. I didn't know that when I moved there. She is one of the greatest supporters in my life. And if she was here today, she would say she is grateful not only for my life, but my voice. The voice that gives her one and women like her as well. My birth mother and I first met about 3 years after we started to communicate. We built walls of trust and love with one another. Really, I built that because she was afraid that somehow I couldn't love her. She was afraid that somehow I couldn't forgive her for that abortion. But after 3 years, we met face to face, and I detail it in one of my books, You Carried Me, A Daughter's Memoir. But I want to leave this story with you today before I share another one with you. Think about a woman who attempted an abortion and her baby survived and her suffering. Think about the struggle she had to feel loved and forgiven. The first time I met her, I knew where she was standing, and my younger half-sister was holding her hand. And as I approached her, my half-sister Jennifer took Ruth's hand and placed it in mine. And to me, that was so symbolic. The first thing Ruth said to me was, I never got to hold you. How many women live with the same pain that Ruth lives with? And when we talk about the impact of abortion, it not only impacts one person's life, it impacts multiple people's lives, and ultimately our families, our communities, and our nation. I am grateful to have a family that has been redeemed and restored in so many ways when we were broken and battered by abortion. But I want this for every family, to have the opportunity to be healed, even though abortion has devastated them in so many ways. And we have the great opportunity with this campaign to bring healing to families just like mine. What an incredible opportunity this is for a different conversation about abortion. I also want to share one other story with you today of a survivor who can't be here. And I want you to remember her story. I can guarantee you, you will remember her face and you will remember it all when you see her. Hope is another abortion survivor like me. So I survived an abortion at about 31 weeks, not the 18 to 20 that the abortionist wrote on my medical records. Hope is a survivor who survived an abortion at about 10 and a half weeks. She wanted to be here today, but the severity of her condition after surviving that abortion makes it hard for her to travel. So I promised her that I would share her story with you. Hope, I know that you'll get to see this. We love you. Hope survived that abortion at 10 and a half weeks. Her birth mother was, therefore, in the first trimester of her pregnancy. We also need to talk about this, right? People think about abortion survivors surviving just late-term abortions. But we need to recognize the fact that babies survive abortions in the first and second trimester as well. Women go on to carry these babies before they even know that they are still pregnant. This is not the outcome that women are told about when they have an abortion. And that was Hope's birth mom's story. She went to an abortion clinic to have that abortion, left believing it had been successful, but God had spared her baby's life. Hope continued to grow in secret. And at 5.5 months, her birth mother felt movement. We hear this from women a lot. They think that the abortion worked and suddenly they start to feel movement. Or they go to a doctor because they think they have the flu and they find out they're still pregnant with a baby they attempted to abort. She chose life that time. And I'm not going to tell you that women choose life even after the first abortion failed. We know that there are many babies who survive abortions who then are aborted another time and another time, just like I testified about earlier this week. But she chose life that time, and she placed Hope for adoption. At that time, they did not know what the outcome was going to be for Hope's life and her health. When Hope was delivered about 2 months early, she weighed 3 pounds, 6 ounces. She was born with a large injury to her head. From her forehead back to her right ear, the skull and scalp had been cut away, leaving jagged edges and her brain exposed. Hope had many complications at birth, but God brought her through it all. When she was well enough to leave the hospital at 3 months old, she was placed for adoption. And she has come so far in 32 years. She's always been an encourager and a peacemaker, and she describes herself as a friend to all. And I can tell you that nothing warms my heart more than the messages that she even sends to me. Hope has dignity and value, and I am so grateful for the opportunity to share her story today. I would now like to introduce another great story and a great person to you, Mia, who is going to share her story with you.